Ed Mercer, a quiet and unassuming mechanic, is called back to the military to help fix an advanced army tank that no one else can repair. Despite being dismissed for his old-fashioned methods, Ed listens to the machine, hearing its heartbeat where others can't. Through his expertise and humility, he uncovers the problem, saving the project and teaching a room full of engineers the value of experience over titles. His journey isn't just about fixing machines, it's about respecting the quiet heroes who work without recognition and the wisdom we often overlook. If Ed's story of quiet wisdom and quiet service resonated with you, like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of everyday heroes. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that honor the unsung voices of experience. Don't forget to join the conversation in the comments. In a hangar filled with the palpable tension of engineers wielding cutting-edge tools and degrees to match, a figure stood apart. A weathered old man, his limp more noticeable than his years, carrying a battered toolbox that had seen better days. The younger engineers exchanged quick, skeptical glances, their whispers sharp and full of doubt. "He's serious," one muttered. "This isn't some old tractor," another remarked. "What's he going to do with that relic? Fix it with that wrench?" Edward Mercer didn't respond to their mutterings or the quiet sneers. He simply knelt down beside the Army's most advanced tank. His eyes were focused, listening, not just to the hum of the machine, but to something deeper, something others had missed. "It's not the engine," he said quietly. "It's the heartbeat of the machine." The room fell silent, as if struck by a collective realization. In that moment, the engineers understood. This was the only man who could save them. The judgment in their eyes froze, replaced by the undeniable truth. They'd underestimated the genius who had quietly stood before them. Edward Ed Mercer was born into silence. His first memory was not the comforting sound of a mother's lullaby or a father's laughter, but the ticking of an old clock that hung on the wall of the orphanage. It was a clock no one cared to fix, a broken thing that had continued its rhythm in defiance of time itself. That clock, in a way, was the first machine that called to him, though he wouldn't have known it then. His parents had died in a house fire when he was barely 3, leaving Ed to the state without a family to take him in. He was passed from one foster home to another like an unwanted package, few families offering him anything beyond what was required. But when Ed was 9, everything changed. The Carters, a farming couple from a dusty town in New Mexico, took him in. Tom Carter was a no-nonsense man with hands toughened by years of working the land, his grip like iron. Ellen, his wife, was kind in a quiet way, slipping an extra biscuit on Ed's plate when he didn't ask for one, knitting him a scarf without needing to know his favorite color. Their farm was humble, a weathered red barn, a pair of stubborn mules, and machinery that coughed and sputtered rather than ran. But to Ed, it felt like a kingdom. It was there, on the Carter farm, that Ed found his calling. One scorching summer afternoon, Tom wrestled with a rusted tractor, its engine sputtering as it failed to plow the field. Ed watched intently, his sharp eyes picking up on the faint rhythm of the engine's failure. That night, after the adults had gone to bed, Ed crept into the barn with an old manual he had found. By dawn, his hands were blackened with grease, but the tractor roared back to life. Tom woke to the sound, came running, and stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the boy beside the humming tractor. He didn't say a word. Instead, he clapped Ed on the shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke louder than any praise. Word spread fast. Farmers came calling when their equipment failed, their hay balers jammed, or their generators shut down. Ed never charged a penny. The work itself was his reward. Listening, diagnosing, fixing what was broken. By the time he was 10, Ed had earned a reputation. He was no longer just the orphan boy on the Carter farm. He was the kid who could fix anything. For nearly 2 years, Ed lived with the Carters, calling their modest house home, believing for once that he had found a place where he truly belonged. Tom and Ellen spoke often of adopting him, but fate had other plans. When Ellen fell ill, medical bills piled up, and the adoption papers were never filed. A distant aunt appeared and offered Ed a room in a city apartment far from the fields he loved. The Carters, their hearts heavy, let him go. They promised to keep in touch, and they did, for a while. But eventually the letters stopped coming. That near adoption taught Ed a hard lesson. Belonging was fleeting, a thing that could disappear as quickly as it came. It hardened him. He became fiercely independent, no longer trusting in promises or the paper-thin security of paperwork. If he wanted a place in the world, he would have to build it with his own hands. At 17, with nothing holding him back, Ed enlisted in the Army. Some said he was running from his past, but Ed knew better. The Army wasn't just an escape, it was the promise of structure, a new family and machines that required care. It was the place where he could put his gift to use, where the rhythm of gears and the hum of engines could become his heartbeat, his purpose, call, or a solicitation. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number. He hesitated, then swiped it open. Hello? His voice, rough from years of disuse and conversation, cracked on the line. Ed Mercer? The voice on the other end was crisp, official. This is Lieutenant Colonel Ryan from the Veterans Affairs Office. Ed's pulse quickened at the mention of VA. It had been months, even years, since he'd heard anything substantial from them. Most of the time, they sent him endless forms that promised help but led to nothing. Still, this was different. A direct call from someone with rank. Yes, this is Ed. Mr. Mercer, we're reaching out in regard to your service-related disability claim. We found some discrepancies in your records, and after a review, we're moving forward with a formal appeal on your behalf. Ed's stomach tightened. He leaned against the tractor, trying to steady his breathing. Appeal? What does that mean exactly? It means that after reviewing your case again, we're looking at an opportunity to secure the benefits that were wrongly withheld from you. You've been overlooked for far too long. Ed could hardly believe it. He felt a strange mixture of skepticism and cautious hope. And you think this will actually go through? There was a pause. Then the officer's voice softened, almost apologetic. I believe it will, yes, but it will take time. We'll need your cooperation. Ed knew the drill. It wasn't the first time someone had said the word cooperation. It was always a polite way of saying he'd need to jump through more hoops, fill out more forms, wait longer, just to be ignored again. But this felt different. There was something about the officer's voice, something sincere that made him feel like he wasn't just a number. I'll help however I can, Ed said, trying to sound confident, though doubt still clouded his mind. Good, said the officer before adding, we'll be in touch soon. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Mercer. The call ended, and for a long moment, Ed stood there, his fingers still curled around the phone, as if trying to process what had just happened. For so long, he had been fighting alone. The Army, the system, the people who promised to help, they had all moved on without him. Now, someone at least was trying to undo the years of neglect. But it wasn't just the call that lingered in his mind. It was the promise of being seen. For once, after so much time in the shadows, someone was acknowledging his sacrifices, his pain, his story. It was a fleeting feeling, but it mattered. As he stood there, the sun fully risen and the desert heat pressing down, Ed thought about his life. He had spent years mending broken machines, fixing things that were only half alive, and doing the best he could with what he had. But what about him? Who would fix Ed Mercer? He shook his head, the thought slipping away as quickly as it had come. There was still work to be done. He still had a purpose. And for the first time in a long while, Ed allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, something good was finally coming his way. He put his phone back in his pocket, wiped the sweat from his brow, and picked up his wrench. The tractor was waiting for him. The voice on the other end of the line was unmistakable. Merc, it said, calm and unwavering. Mr. Mercer, this is General Raymond Cole from Fort Jackson. We need your help. It's urgent. Ed's chuckle was almost automatic, an instinctive reaction to the absurdity. I think you've got the wrong guy, General. No mistake, the general replied. You're Edward Mercer, former sergeant, Army Corps of Engineers. Ed froze. His heart skipped a beat at the mention of his old rank, a title that hadn't crossed his mind in decades. The voice on the other end wasn't just official, it had that familiar edge, the kind of tone that meant something had gone horribly wrong. There was a brief silence before the general spoke again. Ed glanced over at his tractor, the faded green paint chipped and worn. He thought of hanging up, but the urgency in General Cole's voice anchored him. He tried to bury the part of him that still cared, but it tugged at him, relentless. I'll come, Ed said quietly. The drive to Fort Jackson was long, monotonous, and solitary. His old pickup groaned over desert roads, kicking up plumes of red dust. The toolbox rattled in the passenger seat, the thermos of coffee untouched beside it. The heat made the horizon shimmer, and as each mile passed, memories surfaced like ghosts, uninvited but persistent. He remembered the first time he'd driven onto a military base, a wide-eyed 17-year-old full of ambition, eager to belong. The smell of diesel and the sound of drill sergeants had made him feel like he had found his place in the world. Late nights in the motor pool, rebuilding engines under the harsh light of bare bulbs, sweat and oil hanging thick in the air. There had been laughter then, and camaraderie, and a shared exhaustion after a job well done. Those were the moments he missed the most. And then there was the memory he tried so hard to forget, the explosion. The deafening sound of metal tearing, the searing pain in his leg, the look on his commander's face as they realized the cost of that failure. It was the day his military career ended and his exile began. As the gates of Fort Jackson appeared in the distance, Ed's pulse quickened. The base was both familiar and foreign, like visiting a childhood home that had been remodeled by strangers. He saw the American flag snapping in the wind, the guard towers, the soldiers moving with precision. At the gate, a young private eyed him with suspicion, taking in his worn boots, his limp, and the battered truck. Ed gave his name, and after a brief exchange of phone calls, was waved through. Driving deeper into the base, the weight of the years pressed down on him. The rows of barracks, the smell of jet fuel in the air, the distant hum of machinery, all of it pulled him back in time. But this wasn't his world anymore. Yet here he was, summoned by a call he never expected, returning to a place he thought he had left behind. Somewhere deep inside, Ed wondered whether this was a second chance or just another painful reminder of what he'd lost. The hangar doors loomed ahead, a gateway to a life that no longer belonged to him. As Ed stepped inside, the temperature dropped, the air heavy with the smell of machine oil, fresh paint, and the sharp tang of ozone from electrical testing. The vast space echoed with the clatter of tools, the hum of generators, and the sharp voices of men who clearly believed they were the smartest people in the room. At the far end, beneath a mess of scaffolding and cables, stood the Army's prized machine, a tank that Ed had only heard rumors about but never expected to see. It was sleek, its matte armor promising an intimidating presence. But at its core was an engine that was supposed to define the future. Instead, it sat there, silent, broken, a failed promise. Near the tank stood 3 engineers in white lab coats, each polished to the standards their degrees demanded. The leader, Dr. Samuel Brooks, looked up as Ed approached. His expression flickered between surprise and disapproval. "This is the specialist?" Brooks asked, his skepticism evident. His voice echoed in the hangar's emptiness, amplified by the steel walls. Sergeant Williams, who had escorted Ed into the room, gave a short nod. "Yes, sir, Edward Mercer." Brooks didn't offer a handshake. "We expected someone more." His words trailed off, unspoken judgment lingering in the air. Ed let the words wash over him, indifferent to their meaning. The system they were working on was cutting-edge, hybrid technology with proprietary algorithms, integrated at the forefront of engineering. He had heard that tone before. The polite dismissal wrapped in technical jargon, a subtle but clear message. "We've already decided you're not worth our time." Yet Ed didn't argue or boast. He simply set his battered toolbox down, worn and scarred from years of use, older than most of the men in the room, and focused on the machine in front of him. The noise of the engineers faded, and the sterile hum of the hangar became background noise. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the familiar scent of hot metal, grease, and hydraulic fluid. These smells were more than just sensory. They were memories, they were clues, and they were grounding him. Approaching the tank, he moved with the reverence of someone stepping toward an altar. His fingers traced its side, not merely feeling the cold metal, but understanding the story it told. Every point where the panels met, every faint vibration from the last failed test, it was all there, etched into the very structure. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, his voice calm and quiet. Brooks gave a brief shrug, his tone indifferent. "We've had specialists on it all week, but be my guest." Without responding, Ed opened his toolbox. No laptops, no digital scanners, just the well-worn hand tools he knew like the back of his hand. There was a mechanical stethoscope, the kind that would have fit right in at a 1950s garage. A thin young engineer smirked. "You do realize this isn't a tractor, right?" Ed didn't rise to the taunt. Instead, he knelt beside the engine, placed the stethoscope against key points, and closed his eyes. The room fell away, the noise of the hangar vanishing as he concentrated solely on the machine's rhythm. He could feel the subtle disruptions in the power flow. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost meditative, as he traced the path of power through the machine, feeling where it should flow smoothly and where it stumbled. The minutes stretched into 20, and the engineers, once dismissive, were now visibly restless. Finally, Ed stood, dusting off his hands as he stood up. "It's not the engine," he said quietly. "It's the mount. There's a micro vibration that only shows up when it heats up and expands. It throws off the sync between systems." Brooks blinked, but Ed wasn't finished. "Check it hot," he said. And just like that, he picked up his toolbox, turned on his heel, and walked out, leaving behind a room that no longer felt as confident as it had before. By the time Ed Mercer arrived back at his small workshop behind the old service station that served as his home, night had fallen. The desert air had a chill to it, broken only by the occasional distant bark of a coyote or the low hum of power lines. Inside, a single bulb flickered above his workbench as he scrubbed the grease off his hands. The scent of soap and oil mingled in the air, a familiar, soothing combination. He had no expectations. He had done his part, offered the knowledge he had, and the rest wasn't his burden to bear. Just as he set down his mug of coffee, the phone rang. Ed stared at it for a long moment, the small glow of the flip phone a lonely beacon in the dim room. "Mercer," he answered, his voice steady, as solid as stone. "Mr. Mercer," came the voice on the other end. It was Dr. Brooks, but his tone had shifted. Gone was the sharp edge, replaced by something quieter, more humble. "I owe you an apology. We ran the tests as you suggested. Hot. The micro vibration was exactly as you said. The dampers failed after prolonged heat exposure. You saved the project." Ed didn't let the praise sway him. He let the words hang in the air, unmoved by the sudden shift in tone from dismissal to respect. He'd seen this before, the doubt, the pride, and the reluctant admission once the facts left no room for denial. "I didn't do it for thanks, Doctor," he said, his voice soft but firm. There was a brief pause on the line before Brooks spoke again, this time with more purpose. "The General would like to speak with you. Would you come back?" Ed agreed, though not for praise or reward. Something in Brooks's voice had changed, and he sensed that this wasn't just about the machine anymore. The next morning, Ed drove to Fort Jackson, his old truck looking out of place among the sleek military SUVs parked in the lot. It had felt just as out of place in the hangar, but now, walking into the building, something felt different. The air was thick with respect, though it was unspoken. No smirks, no folded arms, no glances exchanged behind his back. Just a stillness, the kind that comes from the kind of reverence earned only through action, not words. Brooks was there with General Cole, waiting near the tank. The machine, once broken, stood whole now, silent, but not lifeless. The general stepped forward, extending his hand toward Ed Mercer. "Sergeant Mercer," he began, using Ed's rank deliberately, "I owe you an apology for how you were received." Ed's first instinct was to wave it off, but the general continued, "There's no need, sir." "Yes, there is," Cole insisted. "You identified a failure no one else saw. You didn't just save this tank, you reminded us what experience looks like, and how easily we forget its value." Ed glanced at the engineers behind them, their faces a mixture of discomfort and admiration. The kind of admiration that still felt a little awkward, as if they were still reconciling the man they doubted with the man standing before them. Then Brooks stepped forward, his expression apologetic. "Mr. Mercer, I spoke out of turn the other day. I judged what I saw, not what was standing in front of me. I'm sorry." Ed nodded, his voice low but clear. "Doctor, it's all right. Happens more than you'd think." As they spoke, Ed's mind wandered, not out of disrespect, but out of reflection. He thought about the way wisdom seemed to be ignored unless it wore the right suit. Why did calloused hands and old tools make people think the mind behind them was outdated too? Why was it so hard to see what truly mattered? The answer, he figured, was simple. People judged what they could see, not what they couldn't. The general made an offer, a position, a chance to consult on future projects, an offer to return to the very system that had once turned its back on him. But Ed only smiled, slow and kind, and turned it down. I appreciate it, sir, truly, but I belong out there now where things are broken, and a man can fix them with his own two hands. As Ed left the hangar, toolbox in hand, he felt no bitterness, only quiet satisfaction. Not because he had proved anyone wrong, but because he had proven to himself that he still mattered. The general's hand lingered on Ed's shoulder, a final gesture of respect as they stood together beneath the cavernous rafters of the hangar. The tank, now whole, gleamed in the morning sunlight pouring through the high windows. Sergeant Mercer, General Cole began, his voice filled with genuine respect. I don't want this to end here. We could use a man like you. No, we need a man like you. We've got other projects in trouble. I want you on board. Consultant, senior advisor, whatever title you want. Ed looked at the man, meeting his eyes, reading the sincerity there. He glanced past him to Dr. Brooks and the younger engineers, those who had once doubted him but now regarded him with humbled admiration. But Ed didn't linger on their faces. His gaze drifted toward the tank, then to his old toolbox resting on the concrete floor, and finally out toward the open hangar doors. Beyond those doors, the desert awaited, wide, empty, and honest. He took a slow breath, the scent of machine oil still fresh in the air, and answered in the only way he knew how. General, Ed began, his voice steady, I appreciate that. I really do. But I'm not meant for boardrooms or titles. I serve by fixing what's broken, not by titles. The general opened his mouth to reply, but Ed held up a hand, gentle but firm. I spent too long thinking a title made me valuable, Ed continued, his voice steady. Sergeant, engineer, mechanic, I thought if I worked hard enough, the name on my uniform would mean something no one could take away. But the truth is, titles come and go. What matters is the work. The work and the good it does. That's all. Brooks stepped forward, a hesitant look in his eyes. But don't you want to be part of something bigger again? Don't you want a seat at the table? Ed smiled, slow and knowing, his gaze calm as he answered, Son, I've already got a seat. It just doesn't look like the ones you're used to. He could see the confusion on Brooks's face, the way the younger man struggled to understand. And Ed didn't blame him. It had taken Ed decades to learn that lesson himself. Inside, Ed's thoughts turned quietly. They think they're offering me honor, a way back in, but I never left what mattered. I never stopped serving. He thought of every fence mended, every engine brought back to life, every neighbor he'd helped during a storm. That was my service. No uniform needed, no badge or office or paycheck with fancy stamps. I need a problem to solve. It was a simple thing to fix. That was where Ed belonged. The general nodded, finally acknowledging that Ed had made up his mind. Then let me do this, he said, pulling an envelope from his coat. This is for what you did, and for what you should have been given a long time ago. Ed hesitated as the envelope hung heavily in the air between them, its weight filled with meaning, with years of recognition long overdue. I didn't do it for that, sir, Ed said quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. The general met his gaze, his eyes steady. I know, he replied. That's why you deserve it. Ed took the envelope without looking inside. Not because he didn't care, but because the true reward wasn't found on paper. It was in the silence of the tank, in the subtle shift in the room, in the respect that now hung between them. Long overdue, but finally earned. As Ed picked up his toolbox and moved toward the open doors, the sun's early light spilled across the floor, turning everything to gold. He stepped into it, his title not written on his back, just a man who was needed elsewhere. Outside, the desert morning was peaceful, only the steady sound of a wrench turning, cutting through the quiet. Ed Mercer knelt by an old generator, the modest structure of his workshop casting long, fading shadows across the dirt. The air was thick with the smell of dust, gasoline, and honest labor. The vehicle's sound reached him before he saw it. the soft crunch of tires on dirt, the low hum of a government-issued SUV. Ed didn't look up right away. He finished tightening the bolt, wiped his hands on a rag, and only then turned to face his visitor. Samuel Brooks stepped out of the SUV, his usual white lab coat replaced with a simple button-down shirt. He looked out of place under the vast Arizona sky, too accustomed to sterile labs and controlled environments, not sun and sand. He shaded his eyes as he came closer. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," Brooks said, his voice quieter than Ed remembered. "Morning, Doctor," Ed replied, placing his tools down and straightening his back. His legs were stiff, but steady. "What brings you out here?" Brooks hesitated, looking at the generator, the small workshop, the battered truck parked nearby. "I had to see you," he said, his voice catching slightly. "In person." Ed raised an eyebrow, waiting. Brooks took a deep breath, gathering in himself. "You taught me something back at the hangar," he began, "and I didn't say it right at the time. I didn't even realize it then, but I see it now." Ed folded his arms, his steady gaze fixed on the younger man. It was the kind of look that made people feel both seen and judged. "I've spent my career in labs, surrounded by fancy degrees and data," Brooks continued. "We chase numbers, models, and simulations, and sometimes we miss what's right in front of us." He paused, his eyes drifting to the generator. "When you put that stethoscope to the engine, you heard what none of us could. I thought I was better because of what was on my wall, but you listened, and that made all the difference." Ed's gaze wandered toward the horizon where the desert met the sky in a shimmering line. His voice was soft when he answered. "Machines, like people, always give you a warning," Ed said. "A rattle before a break, a hitch in the rhythm, a change in the sound. But people don't always hear it. Too busy, too proud, too sure they already know the answers." Brooks lowered his head, humbled by the truth in Ed's words. "I wanted to thank you, Mr. Mercer," Brooks said, "not just for fixing that tank, but for opening my eyes. I've been thinking about it ever since, about listening better. To machines, to people." Ed smiled, small, quiet, but his eyes shone with something warmer. "That's good, son. That's real good." There was a long pause, the kind that needed no words. Then Brooks extended his hand. No grand speeches, no fanfare, just a simple gesture of respect. One craftsman to another, regardless of titles or degrees. Ed took it, his grip firm, but not harsh. In that handshake, there was no need for more. The past, the doubts, the dismissals, all of that faded away. What remained was respect, earned and true. Brooks turned to leave, heading back to the SUV. The morning sun painted the desert with gold as it cast long shadows across the dirt road. Ed watched him go, then turned back to his work. There was still more to do. Ed Mercer was exactly where he belonged. The work was endless, but it was the kind of work that gave him purpose, an unspoken satisfaction that didn't require validation or praise. It wasn't just about fixing machines, but about honoring something deeper in life. Ed's story wasn't a headline-grabbing tale, nor was it a dramatic rescue. It was a reminder of the people we tend to overlook in our modern world. Those who aren't chasing the next title, the latest degree, or compiling the flashiest resumes. In the rush of a fast-paced, technology-driven society, it's easy to forget the quiet ones, the unsung heroes who do the hard work without fanfare. People like Ed, who listens before acting, who repairs what's broken not for recognition, but because it's the right thing to do, remind us of a truth we often overlook. Real wisdom can be found in places we forget to look. Take a moment and think about it. Across small towns and neighborhoods just like yours, there are people like Ed, the ones who make sure the church's heating system is ready for winter, the retired electrician who rewires a neighbor's house after a storm, or the old mechanic who keeps the school buses running safely down the road. Their work is invisible in the headlines, but it's the glue that keeps the world together. Without them, the fabric of our communities would unravel. And maybe that's the most important lesson Ed's story teaches us. We are so caught up in the noise of modern life, from the debates that rage online to the constant chase for the latest trend, that we often fail to pause. To ask ourselves, do we truly see the ones who fix what's broken? The ones with the quiet strength, who've been through hardships and still stand ready to lend a hand? Are we listening to their voices, Those who've lived through the trenches and understand the value of slow, steady work. The question is simple yet profound. Do we take the time to notice the person who steps in to help without seeking applause? The one who grabs their toolbox, steps into the background, and quietly makes things right. Maybe in today's world, we need to slow down and listen more closely, to hear the soft rattle before the break, to notice those whose presence is like the hum of a machine that keeps things running smoothly. Do you know someone like Ed? Someone who fixes not just machines but communities and lives without asking for anything in return? Someone who, like Ed, keeps everything functioning when no one's looking? Think about it. What does Ed's story teach us about our modern lives? Share your thoughts, your stories, or your own quiet heroes in the comments below. Let's start a conversation and celebrate these unsung champions together. Here's something else to consider. If Ed had accepted the offer to return to the system, would he have lost the very thing that makes him who he is? Is our society pushing people to choose between their calling and their comfort? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. Thank you for spending your time with us. If this story resonated with you, if it made you pause and reflect or reminded you of someone who's quietly impacted your life, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to share stories that honor the quiet strength, wisdom, and heart of everyday heroes, the ones who don't seek the spotlight, but still make the world a better place, one small act at a time. Because sometimes what the world needs isn't loud voices or grand gestures. Sometimes it just needs someone who knows how to listen to a machine, to a neighbor, to what's broken, and quietly make it right.